Hello again, family. This is day 12 of our Reading Through the Bible Together in a Year series. Today we're covering Genesis chapters 37 through 40. Now, yesterday, what we ended with was Jacob and Esau reconciling over the fact that they're burying their father together, and then we had a long genealogy about Esau's descendants. But now we're diving into the story of Joseph, and that's going to cover the rest of Genesis pretty much. So let's get into it. Now Yaakov was living in the land where his father had made a place for himself, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Yaakov. Yosef, a boy 17 years old, was looking after the flock, together with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. And Yosef gave their father a bad account of them. Now the love which Yisrael had for Yosef was greater than his love for all his other children, because he got him when he was an old man. And he had a long coat made for him. And because his brothers saw that Yosef was dearer to his father than all the others, they were full of hate for him, and would not say a kind word to him. Now Yosef had a dream, and he gave his brothers an account of it, which made their hate greater than ever. And he said to them, "Let me give you the story of my dream. We were in the field, getting the grain stems together, and my grain kept upright, and yours came round and went down on the earth before mine." And his brothers said to him, "Are you to be our king? Will you have authority over us?" And because of his dream and his words, their hate for him became greater than ever. Then he had another dream, and gave his brothers an account of it, saying, "I have had another dream. The sun and the moon and the 11 stars gave honor to me." And he gave word of it to his father and brothers. But his father, protesting, said, "What sort of dream is this? Am I and your mother and your brothers to go down on our faces to the earth before you?" His brothers were full of envy, but his father kept his words in mind. Now his brothers went to keep watch over their father's flock in Shechem. And Yisrael said to Yosef, "Are not your brothers with the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said to him, "Here am I." And he said to him, "Go now and see if your brothers are well, and how the flock is. Then come back and give me word." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man saw him wandering in the country, and said to him, "What are you looking for?" And he said, "I am looking for my brothers. Please give me word of where they are keeping their flock." And the man said, "They have gone away from here, for they said in my hearing, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Yosef went after them, and came up with them at Dothan. But they saw him when he was a long way off, and before he came near them, they made a secret design against him to put him to death, saying to one another, "See, here comes this dreamer. Let us now put him to death, and put his body into one of these holes, and we will say, 'An evil beast has put him to death.' Then we will see what becomes of his dreams." But Reuven, hearing these words, got him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life. Do not put him to a violent death, but let him be placed in one of the holes." This he said to keep him safe from their hands, with the purpose of taking him back to his father again. So when Yosef came to his brothers, they took off his long coat which he had on, and they took him and put him in the hole. Now the hole had no water in it. Then seating themselves, they took their meal, and looking up they saw a traveling band of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead on their way to Egypt, with spices and perfumes on their camels. And Yehudah said to his brothers, "What profit is there in putting our brother to death and covering up his blood? Let us give him to these Ishmaelites for a price, and let us not put violent hands on him, for he is our brother, our flesh." And his brothers gave ear to him. And some traders from Midian went by. So pulling Yosef up out of the hole, they gave him to the Ishmaelites for 20 bits of silver, and they took him to Egypt. Now when Reuven came back to the hole, Yosef was not there. And giving signs of grief, he went back to his brothers and said, "The child is gone. What am I to do?" Then they took Yosef's coat, and put on it some of the blood from a young goat which they had put to death. And they took the coat to their father, and said, "We came across this. Is it your son's coat or not?" And he saw that it was, and said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast has put him to death. Without doubt Yosef has come to a cruel end." Then Yaakov, giving signs of grief, put on haircloth, and went on weeping for his son day after day. And all his sons and all his daughters came to give him comfort, but he would not be comforted, saying with weeping, "I will go down to the underworld to my son." So great was his father's sorrow for him. And in Egypt the men of Midian gave him for a price to Potiphar, a captain of high position in Pharaoh's house. Now at that time Yehudah went away from his brothers, and became the friend of a man of Adullam named Hirah. And there he saw the daughter of a certain man of Canaan named Shua, and took her as his wife. And she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name of And again she gave birth to a son, and he gave him the name Onan. Then she had another son, to whom she gave the name Shelah. She was at Cheziv when the birth took place. And Yehudah took a wife for his first son and her name was Tamar. Now Yehudah's first son, did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so that he put him to death. Then Yehudah said to Onan, Go into your brother's wife, and do what is right for a husband's brother to do. Make her your wife, and get offspring for your brother. But Onan, seeing that the offspring would not be his, went into his brother's wife, but let his seed go on the earth, so that he might not get an offspring for his brother. And what he did was evil in the eyes of the Lord, so that he put him to death like his brother. Then Yehudah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Go back to your father's house, and keep yourself as a widow, till my son Shelah becomes a man. For he had in his mind the thought that death might come to him, as it had come to his brothers. So Tamar went back to her father's house, and after a time Bathshua, Yehudah's wife, came to her end. And after Yehudah was comforted for her loss, he went to Timnah, where they were cutting the wool of his sheep. And his friend Hirah of Adullam went with him. And when Tamar had news that her father-in-law was going up to Timnah to the wool cutting, she took off her widow's clothing, and covering herself with her veil, she took her seat near Enaim on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was now a man, but she had not been made his wife. When Yehudah saw her, he took her to be a loose woman of the town, because her face was covered. And turning to her by the roadside, he said to her, Let me come in to you. For he had no idea that she was his daughter-in-law. And she said, What will you give me as my price? And he said, I will give you a young goat from my flock. And she said, What will you give me as a sign till you send it? And he said, What would you have? And she said, Your ring and its cord and the stick in your hand. So he gave them to her and went into her, and she became with child by him. Then she got up and went away and took off her veil and put on her widow's clothing. Then Yehudah sent his friend Hirah with a young goat to get back the things which he had given as a sign to the woman, but she was not there. And he put questions to the men of the place, saying, Where is the loose woman who was in Enaim by the wayside? They said, There was no such woman there. So he went back to Yehudah and said, I have not seen her, and the men of the place say that there is no such woman there. And Yehudah said, Let her keep the things, so that we may not be shamed. I sent the young goat, but you did not see the woman. Now about 3 months after this, word came to Yehudah that Tamar, his daughter-in-law, had been acting like a loose woman and was with child. And Yehudah said, Take her out and let her be burned. And while she was being taken out, she sent word to her father-in-law, saying, The man whose property these things are is the father of my child. Say then, whose are this ring and this cord and this stick? Then Yehudah said openly that they were his, and said, She is more upright than I am, for I did not give her to Shelah my son. And he had no more connection with her. And when the time came for her to give birth, it was clear that there were 2 children in her body. And while she was in the act of giving birth, one of them put out his hand, and the woman who was with her put a red thread round his hand, saying, This one came out first. But then he took his hand back again, and his brother came first to birth. And the woman said, What an opening you have made for yourself. So he was named Perez. And then his brother came out with the red thread around his hand, and his name was Zerah. Now Yosef was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar the Egyptian, a captain of a high position in Pharaoh's house, got him for a price from the Ishmaelites, who had taken him there. And the Lord was with Yosef, and he did well, and he was living in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, making everything he did go well, and having a high opinion of Yosef as his servant, he made him the overseer of his house, and gave him control over all he had. And from the time when he made him overseer and gave him control of all with his property, the blessing of the Lord was with the Egyptian because of Yosef. The blessing of the Lord was on all he had in the house and in the field. And he gave Yosef control of all his property, keeping no account of anything but only the food which was put before him. Now Yosef was very beautiful in form and face, and after a time his master's wife, looking on Yosef with desire, said to him, Be my lover. But he would not, and he said to her, You see that my master keeps no account of what I do in his house, and has put all his property in my control, so that no one has more authority in this house than I have. He has kept nothing back from me for you, because you are his wife. How then may I do this great wrong, sinning against God? And day after day she went on requesting Yosef to come to her and be her lover, but he would not give ear to her. Now one day he went into the house to do his work, and not one of the men of the house was inside. And pulling at his coat, she said, "Come to my bed." But slipping out of his coat, and he went running away. And when she saw that he had gotten away, letting her keep his coat, she sent for the men of her house and said to them, "See, he has let a Hebrew come here and make sport of us. He came to my bed, and I gave a loud cry. And hearing it, he went running out without his coat. And she kept his coat by her till his master came back. Then she gave him the same story, saying, The Hebrew servant whom you have taken into our house came in to make sport of me. And when I gave a loud cry, he went running out without his coat." And hearing his wife's account of what his servant had done, he became very angry. And Yosef's master took him and put him in prison, in the place where the king's prisoners were kept in chains, and he was there in the prison house. But the Lord was with Yosef and was good to him, and made the keeper of the prison his friend. And the keeper of the prison put all the prisoners under Yosef's control, and he was responsible for whatever was done there. And the keeper of the prison gave no attention to anything which was under his care, because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything he did go well. Now after these things, the chief servant who had the care of the wine and the chief bread maker in Pharaoh's house did something against Pharaoh's orders. And Pharaoh was angry with his two servants, the chief wine servant and the chief bread maker, and he put them in prison under the care of the captain of the army, in the same prison where Yosef himself was shut up. And the captain put them in Yosef's care, and he did what was needed for them, and they were kept in prison for some time. And these two had a dream on the same night, the chief wine servant and the chief bread maker of the king of Egypt, who were in prison. The two of them had dreams with a special sense. And in the morning, when Yosef came to them, he saw that they were looking sad. And he said to the servants of Pharaoh who were in prison with him, "Why are you looking so sad?" Then they said to him, "We have had a dream, and no one is able to give us the sense." And Yosef said, "Does not the sense of dreams come from God? What was your dream?" Then the chief wine servant gave Yosef an account of his dream, and said, "In my dream I saw a vine before me, and on the vine were 3 branches, and it seemed as if it put out buds and flowers, and from them came grapes ready for cutting. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and crushing them into Pharaoh's cup, gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand." Then Yosef said, "This is the sense of your dream. The 3 branches are 3 days. After 3 days, Pharaoh will give you honor and put you back into your place, and you will give him his cup as you did before, when you were his wine servant. But keep me in mind when things go well for you, and be good to me and say a good word for me to Pharaoh, and get me out of this prison. For truly I was taken by force from the land of the Hebrews, but I have done nothing for which I might be put in prison." Now when the chief bread maker saw that the first dream had a good sense, he said to Yosef, "I had a dream, and in my dream there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. And in the top basket were all sorts of cooked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds were taking them out of the basket on my head." Then Yosef said, "This is the sense of your dream. The 3 baskets are 3 days. After 3 days, Pharaoh will take you out of prison, hanging you on a tree, so that your flesh will be food for birds." Now the 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his servants, and he gave honor to the chief wine servant and the chief bread maker among the others. And he put the chief wine servant back in his old place, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But the chief bread maker was put to death by hanging, as Yosef had said. But the wine servant did not keep Yosef in mind or give a thought to him. So several interesting stories, mostly about Joseph, but the one about Judah and Tamar is very interesting because we see a lot of character growth in Judah himself. It seems at the beginning of the story he's not very interested in being a part of his own family, not really taking the responsibility that he should be, but after he sees what Tamar does in order to help him keep his own promise and do what the patriarch of a family is supposed to do, he seems to lean a little bit in a more righteous direction, and we'll see that happen later on in the Joseph story. But as far as Joseph's concerned, one thing to take note of that we probably don't think about too much is that when Israel gives Joseph the extra coat, the ornate robe, or the Technicolor dream coat, as we always like to say. He's choosing Joseph to be the next in line to take care of the family. He's choosing him to be the firstborn. Now, he's not technically the first one born to Jacob, but he is the firstborn to Rachel. So it's not a great thing that Jacob is doing that. However, Joseph is a firstborn. But that's one of the reasons why the rest of the brothers hate him so much. And so when we think about Joseph telling them their dreams, a lot of the times he's depicted as showing off or flaunting his being loved by his father, or that they will bow down to him and consider him great. But the reality is he may just be saying, guys, like, I know that Dad has chosen me this way, but so has God, it seems. Like, he's interpreting these dreams; they must be from God. So think about that a little bit today, that maybe Joseph wasn't just being an arrogant 17-year-old, but maybe he was. I hope you have a wonderful day.